as when we lie about our intentions. Fourth, when language is used as an instrument to inflict harm and grief on others. But it is the first two of these that will misguide our understanding of ourselves and our social world. We have a tendency to conflate spirituous things, imaginary things, objects of superstition, mysticism, legend, and lore, with ontologically real material things. Loose talk is, in the current vernacular, the way we would describe the absurdity that Hobbes is warning us against. We engage in loose talk. We fail to distinguish, he says, between real bodies and spiritus, immaterial things. You know, in some respects, Hobbes is anticipating much that will come to be regarded as analytical philosophy, the idea being that there aren't any actual philosophical problems as such. There are confusions, and these are essentially grammatical and linguistic. Much more of this toward the end of this series of lectures. Well, we speak, for example, about seeking to infuse faith in someone. Now, of course, this is a metaphorical figure of speech. I don't think we have to be chastened if we understand this as a figure of speech. The problem is, on Hobbes's account, when you adopt this kind of talk habitually, you begin to think of faith as some thing that can be infused as such into a material body. And before you know it, you're under the weight of your own linguistic confusions, and you're beginning to treat non-things as things, and vice versa. This is a habit that must be relinquished if there really is going to be a scientific understanding of how society should be structured and maintained. Now, it's one thing to develop what Newton develops as a mathematical model. It's another thing to begin to think that reality is just the model. Hobbes argues that this was something that the scholastics were particularly guilty of, this metaphorical mode of thinking. That's not part of the Hobbesian realist approach to social problems and to civics. For Hobbes, reason itself is a product, a mode of speech. And this expresses itself in the form of, quote, reckoning. This is Hobbes now. Reckoning, that is, adding and subtracting of the consequences of general names agreed upon for marking and signifying our thoughts. You see, he wants to reduce reason itself to a kind of linguistic process that itself is reducible to the process of addition and subtraction. To comprehend reality in a rational manner, then, is to reckon correctly. It's to add and subtract correctly in the management of those general terms that express our thoughts. What is reality, then? Reality for Hobbes is physical reality, and Hobbes makes no mistake about it. If we're to have a scientific understanding of man, therefore, then man must be accepted as a material entity. Man is a material object in a material world, subject to the laws of gravitation. He has mass, moving parts, internal anatomy, all of this subject to the laws of nature. Gassendi couldn't have said it any better. Now, what is society? It's a collection of such entities. So society, properly understood, is a congeries of material objects. You see, what we're doing is we're adding them. Now, this doesn't dehumanize. The proper understanding of humanity is just the proper understanding of the realistically material dimensions of human beings that can be observed and explained. Society is a collection of persons, and therefore it can be understood as a complex system made up of matter in motion, for that's what we are. Now, there are two kinds of motion we can observe in ourselves. There is the involuntary or vital motion, the sort of motion that takes place when digestive organs work on food, or when a hot object finds the hand being reflexively removed. There's that kind of involuntary motion. But there's also, says Hobbes, intentional motion, not the vital motion that is instinctual or reflexive, but intentional movement. Why do we ever move intentionally? We move intentionally because we have motives and desires. Now, if we are material things, what will be the root motive and root desire? Well, the root motives and desires are those that will be grounded in pleasure and pain. So, Hobbes's foundational psychology is hedonistic, and it's developed in chapter 6 of Leviathan under the heading, quote, this is a long heading now, of the interior beginnings of voluntary motions, commonly called the passions, and the speeches by which they are expressed, close quote. What do we learn? Well, the reason Smith moves from here to there is because this location has something Smith wants, which couldn't be got in that location. Movement then is to be understood as a particular complex effect of preceding causes based on a state or condition of the body. Though one does not sense or feel the antecedent motions, they are there, for every effect has a preceding cause. The interior motions, or in Hobbes's terms, the endeavors, constitute desire when it impels motion toward an object, and aversion when it impels behavior away from an object. Now, what's the ultimate motive? Well, the ultimate motive is survival. Not the ancient Greek eudaimonia, not eternal salvation, except in the sense of eternal salvation as ultimate survival. On the earthly plane, it's corporeal survival, freedom from pain and suffering. What approximates or typically leads to survival is that which promotes good feelings. And what puts a distance between life and its survival is anything that causes pain and injury. You're surely getting the picture here. So all the high-blown moral language bequeathed by the ancients and celebrated by the scholastics, the stock in trade of all deeply religious people, finally refers to impulses to survive. That is what morality is finally about on Hobbes's account. We are told to approach the good and shun evil. We're supposed to conduct our lives in a way that's morally sound and fitting. We are to seek to promote virtue within ourselves. What is this all about? It's about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Hobbes is not a man lacking in commendable human characteristics, and he is not skeptical about morality. Rather, he wants to know what the reference of moral terms is. Are these just words devoid of meaning? No, they're not devoid of meaning. Words like good and bad, or good and evil, have meaning. It's the meaning associated with survival, with pleasure and pain. What is good is that which conduces to pleasurable states of affairs, and what is bad is that which has destructive or painful consequences attached to it. Now, constancy is not to be expected in such matters. Some desires are innate. Hunger and thirst naturally result in desire for food and drink. But many others are acquired, and furthermore, and here's a quote from Hobbes now, quote, because the constitution of a man's body is in continual mutation, it is impossible that all the same things should always cause in him the same appetites and aversions, much less can all men consent in the desire of almost any one and the same object, close quote. So variation is to be expected here. Now, once you put these ingredients together, you begin to see the basis upon which we do enter into civil society. Why do we enter? Man is by nature a social animal, as Aristotle said? No. Hobbes, I think, would put it rather differently. Man is by nature a self-defending animal, a self-interested and indeed selfish animal, seeking to survive in a perilous world. Therefore, man enters into civil society in the interest of survival in a self-interested way. And what is it he's trying to avert in forming these social compacts or social affiliations? Well, what he's seeking to avert is suffering and death. Indeed, it is the fear of a violent death that commits one to compacts with others, who, through a combination of their individual powers, come to have the means of defense on which each member of the community can rely. Quote, the greatest of human powers is that which is compounded of the powers of most men united by consent in one person, natural or civil, that has the use of all their powers depending on his will. Such is the power of these that will misguide our understanding of ourselves and our social world. We have a tendency to conflate spirituous things, imaginary things, objects of superstition, mysticism, legend, and lore, with ontologically real material things. Loose talk is, in the current vernacular, the way we would describe the absurdity as when we lie about our intentions. Fourth, when language is used as an instrument to inflict harm and grief on others. But it is the first two that Hobbes is warning us against. We engage in loose talk. We fail to distinguish, he says, between real bodies and spiritus, immaterial things. You know, in some respects, Hobbes is anticipating much that will come to be regarded as analytical philosophy, the idea being that there aren't any actual philosophical problems as such. There are confusions, and these